opportunities, we know that we cannot accomplish this alone, and it truly takes a village. This is my why cultivating and nurturing strong partnerships matters to me. In fact, according to the Joint Policy Statement on Early Childhood Inclusion from the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Education in 2015, they said, quote, addressing the remaining challenges and barriers to inclusion in early childhood programs and ensuring, something popped up on my screen. And ensuring that children with disabilities receive individualized supports they need to thrive requires a community-wide partnership that brings families, advocates, and self-advocates, developmental specialists, early childhood programs, schools, LEAs, and community and state leaders together to build a culture of inclusion supported by the empirical and legal foundations of inclusion. I apologize for my pause. I had a quick little alert to the previous session's recording. So that's my why. What is your why? Why is it important to you to really cultivate strong partnerships? Take a second to think about it, and then feel free to put it in the chat box if you'd like. Thanks. So we know it's so important to build strong, healthy partnership, but it takes work. Collaborating with partners, particularly as partnerships begin, can seem quite simple. Typically, everyone enters on their best behavior with the intent of getting along well. But challenges can occur when the needs of the partnership interact with individual personalities, right? You can probably try to give a thumbs up if you've ever experienced that, or something like a yes in the chat. You need to take the time to set the tone of the partnership and develop trusting relationships among members. It can be the most beneficial investment the partners can make to ensure healthy, successful, and lasting partnerships, right? Partnerships and collaboration are truly a labor of love. Strong, healthy partnerships are grounded in the following: respect, responsibility, and relationships, right? And we always need to remember to choose that respect and those relationships over control. But sometimes that can be easier said than done. As partnerships are being developed, it is important to remember a few basic assumptions that will help the group develop more smoothly. An early key to success is making sure that from the beginning, all partners share the same vision and mission and agree to the anticipated results. This mission can be used as a focal point to remind partners of the value and importance of the work ahead. While partnerships are not simple or easy, developing and following some basic strategies will help keep the partnership on track. So take a second to think, what do you feel is the most crucial strategy to follow when collaborating with partners? You'll see a quick poll pop up on your screen momentarily. And if there's something else you don't see represented, feel free to share that in the chat as well. I see a lot of people are choosing communication, and I completely agree. All of this is important, but I imagine you joined today's session because you wanted to learn more about how you can improve communication, both within the sector that you work with and also outside of it, because we know partnerships can be vast. So it looks like everyone has voted. Can we share the results? Yeah, communication was a clear winner, because I agree that it's super important to share a vision, but we can't share a vision if we haven't first laid the groundwork for the way that we're going to have some authentic communication. The act of collaboration must start with dialogue. But what does that mean to you? What is dialogue? How do we have dialogue? What's included when we have a conversation? If you have any thoughts, you can drop that in the chat. And I'll give you the rest of the quote. You cannot build relationships without having an understanding of your potential partners. And you cannot achieve that understanding without a special form of communication that goes beyond ordinary conversation, right? So our conversation and our relationships need to go deeper than that surface level. Now, most people think that they're good collaborators. But what the IDEA partnership found in their work was that most collaboration happens at a fairly low level, at that surface level. It is so important to discover shared values and interests. Don't let commonality among your partners, among your teammates, be masked by different vocabulary and unique identities. I know that oftentimes we can get so bogged down with working in our silos. We might be on the special education side of things, or maybe we are working in Head Start or community childcare, and we have our own lingo that we use. And we can't let that become a barrier to really working together to support all children, or whatever your why might have been for what you're doing with your partnership. We need to build strong relationships to actively engage with enough frequency to gain trust and allow for authentic engagement. And this is where that relationship building really comes in, because we can be put together and know that we have to partner for some reason. But if we don't take the time to really build the relationship and build the trust, then why would someone be authentic, transparent? It's really going to keep our partnership at a very basic level, and we want to be able to go beyond that. So the partnership way no longer refers to the IDEA partnership, but rather the strategy of partnership that builds connections and fosters that authentic engagement through something called leading by convening. And if you're interested in learning more about this, there is a link that Heather has put in the chat box, which will take you to this document. The document has lots more information than I'm going to share now, and it also has a lot of tools that you can use as you're working with partners and stakeholders and on the various teams that you sit on. We know that the most deep learning takes place across complex landscapes of communities, networks, teams, conversations, and connections. It is important to recognize that all individuals come to the process as learners, right? So we're all leaders, but we're also learners first. Each enters into the process having experiences that have contributed to a level of expertise derived from those experiences. And it's through the eyes of that personal experience that each views the issue or the problem. And that's another reason why it's great to partner with agencies and individuals that we don't work with on a typical basis, because they might have a fresh set of eyes on something that's been bugging us forever. And once they put their eyes on it from their unique perspective and experiences, it can help us look at ways to solve that problem and grow. So we need to remain active learners to be good leaders. We need to be open to hearing and listening and truly considering all other perspectives. Checking one's ego at the door, leaving assumptions behind. We've all heard that little adage about what happens when you assume, and being open to unlearning as well as learning are essential qualities of an active learner. Through convening via the partnership way, deeply rooted personal experiences create knowledge, lead to additional questions, and ignite both passion for the issue and commitment to finding and implementing solutions. So I'm going to pause and pass it over to Dr. Everson to tell us more tips about effective communication strategies.
Thank you, Carrie. It shouldn't come as any surprise that in Carrie's poll, communication came up as the single greatest issue that participants in this webinar were interested in. Effective communication is indeed the cornerstone of all human relationships. And it really doesn't matter whether we're talking about our relationships with family members and significant others, or with coworkers and other professionals. What we know is that communication is consistently identified as one of the top 5 reasons that people have difficulty with collaboration or teamwork. And in fact, when we talk about virtual teamwork, it is consistently identified as the #1 barrier to collaboration. So we're going to talk today about one model that I think you might find readily accessible as you think about improving or enhancing your communication skills. This communication 13 different behaviors, and I'm going to talk briefly about each of the 13 behaviors. As I talk about them, feel free to jot down in the chat or later to ask a question about how this behavior might relate to you. My challenge for you today is, as you listen, to identify one of the behaviors that you would like to do either more of or less of. And as you learn more about what they are, I think you'll understand why I say more or less of. The 13 behaviors can be broken into 4 categories of behaviors. And the first category is initiating behaviors. Initiating has 2 distinctly different types of behaviors. The first is when someone in your collaborative proposes a new idea or an action to the team. The new idea can be something as simple as, I think we should go to lunch at the Small Sugar restaurant. We've never been there before. Expanding is when somebody else, not the initial proposer, but somebody else expands upon that. I think we should hold our next meeting there. That's a great idea. Proposing and expanding should occur about 15% of the time during a meeting. In other words, you want a balance of people coming up with new ideas and actions, because that generates energy. It makes people feel creative and excited. But the other side of that is if there's too much proposing, too much expanding, people begin to feel overwhelmed. They begin to feel that your collaborative is indecisive and nothing is really occurring. We like to see proposing and expanding at the beginning of a meeting or at the beginning of a collaborative activity, or when a new agenda item is brought to the table. There should be enough proposing and expanding that everybody who wants to contribute has an opportunity to do so, but not so much that 1 or 2 people are monopolizing the conversation. In the next slide, I'll talk about 4 additional behaviors. This is the second category, and these are called active listening behaviors. Now, we want to have about 70%. So therefore, most of our communication during a collaborative activity should occur in this category. There are 5 distinctly different behaviors, and I'll go through each of them. Informing is when you tell people facts or data. It's not an opinion. You are sharing with them information. For example, the policy on inclusion in South Carolina requires these 3 variables. Inquiring is when someone asks a question, and inquiring is to clarify. Either a proposal has been made or information has been shared, and you want to make sure you understand exactly what the person said. Reflecting becomes really critical, particularly in virtual forums, because we know that a large amount of communication is nonverbal. And yet it's more difficult virtually to pick up on those behaviors. Reflecting is when you say to someone, I sense, I observe, I feel like you're not agreeing with the proposal. Or perhaps you say, I've noticed that you haven't really commented on this proposal. How do you feel about it? It brings the person in, gives them an opportunity to participate, and it also shows that you respect the behavior, the nonverbal behavior that you have seen them. Testing for understanding is probably, of the 13, the behavior that you might be least familiar with. Testing for understanding is always a question. It is a question that is asked of someone to see if you understand or to clarify what has previously been made. So testing for understanding is always, can you tell me a little bit more about what you said? I think I heard you say that you want to hold our next meeting at the Small Sugar Restaurant. Is that correct? Testing for understanding is an underused behavior, and one that if you are someone who tends to be a quick agreeer or a quick disagreeer, is a good way to make sure you really are clear on what the person said before you jump in with your agreement or disagreement. Summarizing is distinctly different from testing for understanding. Summarizing assumes that you clearly understand what has been said or what has been agreed upon, and you're ready to conclude the discussion about the topic. Summarizing should always be done at the end of an agenda item or at the end of a meeting to make sure that everyone is clear. But summarizing should only be done if testing for understanding, reflecting, inquiring, and informing have been allowed to occur. Again, keep in mind that I said about 70% of your behaviors during a collaborative endeavor should take place in this category. The third category in the next slide are responding behaviors.
Hi, Jane. Can we take 1 minute to switch interpreters?
Absolutely. It's a good spot. Okay, the next slide and the next category of behaviors are responding behaviors. Carrie, are you going to switch the slide? Thank you. There are 4 responding behaviors, and they should occur about 10% of the time during a collaborative endeavor. The 4 behaviors are agreeing, and this is when you actively support another team member's ideas. You agree with them. Disagreeing is when you actively lack support. You disagree with another person's ideas. And I want to differentiate here that it's really important, if you agree, to say you agree. If you disagree, say you disagree. A person who begins a statement with, I agree with Carrie, but I think we should, is actively disagreeing. There's nothing wrong with disagreeing. It makes most of us uncomfortable. It's human nature to want people to like us and to agree with us. What we need to remember is that disagreeing is about a lack of support for someone's ideas. It doesn't mean you don't like the team member. It means you disagree with their idea. Now, as I said in the previous slide, I think many of us jump in with disagreement before we truly understand what a person has said. So if you find that you're a person who tends to start thinking about your response before the other person has finished talking, or if you've been told by someone you always disagree, you seem to never like somebody's ideas, then think about expanding your repertoire to do more testing for understanding, more inquiring, and more reflecting. And then if you truly do disagree, jump right in there and disagree. Now, although we want to see about 10% of our behaviors occurring in this category, the final two, attacking and defending, are really behaviors that we don't want to see at all. They're going to occur, maybe more likely in interpersonal relationships than in collaboratives, but we really don't want to see attacking. Attacking is different from disagreement because attacking is personal. It's when someone makes sarcastic or personal comments about someone, not their ideas. So for example, if you hear someone say, "You never like anybody's ideas. You are always on the fence about things, never can make a decision," that's attacking. And what it's going to do is put the person on the defensive. It's human nature. If we feel attacked, we're going to defend ourselves. And typically when we defend ourselves, what do? We turn around and we attack back. So then you have these arrows going back and forth of attacking and defending, and you get in this circle of nothing getting done. So again, if you find that you're a person who attacks and defends, then you want to try to think about your active listening. Go back to the inquiring, back to the testing for understanding before you agree or disagree. And make sure when you disagree that you truly and clearly are disagreeing with the person's ideas or proposals, not with their personality. The final category, in the next slide, are process behaviors. Process behaviors should occur about 5% of the time. So they're the least occurring behaviors in a collaborative endeavor. But I would suggest that particularly when we're talking about people who may not be as actively involved in a collaborative, perhaps self-advocates, individuals with disabilities, family members who may not be as familiar with the acronyms and language, as Kiri mentioned earlier, these behaviors become essential. Bringing in is when you seek ways to make a person who doesn't say very much, who doesn't make many contributions to a discussion, when you seek ways to bring them in. This can be done during the collaborative by actually saying, "Mary, I haven't heard your opinion on this. As a parent, I'd really like to know how you feel about it." Or if you really feel the person is uncomfortable or shy, you may want to chat with them in the hallway between meetings during the break and say, "Mary, I know you have a lot of experience with this, and I think the team would benefit if you wouldn't mind sharing your experiences with us." Shutting out is just the opposite. That is when you are attempting to close out the participation of someone who has perhaps said the same thing over and over, or someone who perhaps has expressed their ideas or opinions, and you are confident that people understand. Shutting out can be done a couple of different ways, respectfully and effectively. One is to summarize what you heard the person say. Summarize as a statement. Don't ask a question, because what happens if you ask a question? They're going to say, "No, that's not exactly what I said. What I said was," if you are confident you understand, summarize what was said, thank the person for their contributions, and then bring in somebody else. Those 13 behaviors are the cornerstone of effective communication. And as I said in the beginning, I'd like each of you to think about one of the 13 that you'd like to do more or less of. And as we get to the Q&A at the end, I'd be happy to chat with you more about how these relate to you and your collaborative. And I'm going to turn it back over to Kiri.
Thanks, Jane. So sometimes I think the collaborative process would work better without you, right? We know this is important, but we've all had that feeling sometimes when it's felt a little bit tricky, or there's been a partner that we've tried all of these strategies for effective communication and we just feel like it's not working, and we're getting frustrated because we're human. So I want you to think about what your biggest challenge is when it comes to partnering and collaborating with your partners. And in a moment, you'll see a quick poll, and then you can weigh in with your input. And again, if your biggest challenge is not up here, feel free to let us know in the chat. And it looks like communication is coming out on top again. Take another second if you didn't provide input, and then we'll go ahead and share that poll result. So again, while all of these pieces can sometimes impede a strong partnership and collaboration, communication has come up as the #1 challenge for the folks presenting today or participating today. And I can see why that might have happened. I feel like all of the other pieces are still grounded in our communication. We might be struggling with collaborative agreements or human resources, but maybe that struggle has to do with the way that we're communicating with those partners. We might find that we're able to be clear on our roles or get those collaborative agreements together if we have more efficient and effective and honest communication. So, conflict management. We know that conflict is an unavoidable part of life. We don't like it, but it is unavoidable. We grow, we learn, and develop greater understanding when we engage in conflict. Learning about differing opinions and points of view can actually propel everyone's thinking and open otherwise unimaginable possibilities. Developing the skills to both recognize and address conflict can lead to better productivity, creativity, cooperation, and collaboration. Conflict provides us all the opportunity to widen our view of the world in which we live. Remember what I said a few minutes ago about everyone's different perspectives? We all come with our own little baggage of what we think, how we think the world is and what we think needs to be done. But when we allow ourselves to engage in some healthy conflict strategies, then it's actually going to make us grow. Conflict is often the result of, shocker, a communication breakdown. So examples of that breakdown can include a lack of communication, right? Sometimes we have that person that we've been trying really hard to get a hold of, whether it's phone calls, text messages, emails, but they're just not responding. Hasty communication that paints an incomplete picture, like maybe a text message. Sometimes things can be misconstrued in text messages, or we aren't able to see a person's tone in a text, or miscommunication that is resulting from a lack of understanding or information. Now, avoiding addressing the beginning stages of conflict can lead to arguments that can get out of hand. So we need to be as proactive as possible, and instead try to follow these proactive approaches. Address and resolve issues before they actually become a conflict. Determine and keep lines of communication open, transparent, and frequent. So also finding out how your partners prefer to have that consistent communication. If you are like, yeah, I love email, so I'm going to make sure I always email everyone, but there is someone that's just not their jam, then maybe it's having a conversation with that particular team member or partner and talking about what's the best way to share communication and maybe coming to a middle ground if possible. Making sure we commit and engage in a positive culture for these teams and partnerships that promotes seeing conflict as an opportunity for growth and learning, incorporating compassion, empathy, finding common ground, and generative listening. Definitely embracing transparency and honest dialogue. Like Jane said, we can't just try to avoid the negative pieces, we have to address them. Valuing all opinions and assuming the positive intent of every communication. I know this is hard, right? Sometimes it's not so easy to assume the best, but if we use that as our starting point and then we look at something that felt a little off to us, we assume the intent was positive. Their why is that they're partnering with us because they also believe in supporting the lives of all young children and families. And if we go from that place, it's easier to try to figure out kind of what went wrong. And reviewing, updating, and ensuring policies, procedures, and roles clearly define these expectations. Now, even if we're proactive, conflict can still occur. So once conflict does occur, resolution needs to include well-defined, accurate, informative, and timely communication, there's that word again, with all the members involved. The diverse perspective each member brings to a team can propel or stall that resolution. Each member's contributions in terms of power, values, attitudes, needs, motivations, and social factors, as well as resources, knowledge, and ideas, has an impact on the effective resolution of conflict. Additionally, how the members intrinsically connect to this team or partnership, how they regard their purpose within it, will influence the resolution. So the use of that authentic communication is also crucial to reaching positive outcomes. And authentic communication is realistic and genuine. It conveys self-respect and respect for others. And this can be challenging for some, and this is why it's important to really embed that early on in your partnerships and keep at it, keep working at it. When all partners address issues together, they can create the unique operating structure that works best for them and set the tone for a truly collaborative partnership, right? Not just at that surface level, but now we're getting deeper and we're really working together and we really have built that trust. Developing a structure for conflict resolution or solution discovery and becoming competent in its use can support strong and healthy partnerships. And the use of a facilitator can also be helpful. This person can offer the objectivity needed to point out the commonalities that we all have. It can also be helpful to appreciate, and it might not be easy, but to appreciate the complexity of problems and avoid that desire to solve the problem before it has been fully defined. Following this approach compels the entity presenting the problem to see some of the unseen issues before attempting to resolve it. So sometimes we might think the issue is here, but really it's much deeper and we have to take some time to fully explore that. And I'm gonna pass it over to Jane to share some more tips for managing conflict.
Great. I like the cartoon that Carrie presented with the tug of war, because that really does give us the best visual of what conflict truly is. when we engage in conflict, it is human nature for us to think, well, I have to win at all cost, which means that there's always a loser on the other side. Getting away from that visual is one of the important ways in which we begin to view conflict, not as a negative, but as Carrie said, as having some positives, bringing diversity of opinions and ideas and experiences to your collaborative. The more diversity you have in a collaborative, and by that I mean experiences and opinions and ideas and personalities, the more potential for conflict you have. When you have a lot of diversity, and I hope you do, because that's the whole reason for coming together as a collaborative, it becomes even more important to use some of those active listening behaviors that I spoke of earlier. Make sure you're doing a lot of inquiring, a lot of informing, a lot of reflecting on the emotion or body language, and a lot of testing for understanding. These are the strategies that will help bring conflict around to more thorough and detailed discussion. The more effective your communication is, the less potential you will have for conflict. So thinking back through the balance of all of the 13 behaviors that I spoke of, and sitting back and observing other members of your collaborative and how they communicate will help you see if the balance of communication is appropriate. When conflict does occur, and it will, it's important to have some strategies in your back pocket, things that you can use to manage the conflict during the moment that it occurs, but also put off the conflict until it's a more appropriate time. Don't be afraid to say that you need to schedule a conversation for a later time. Addressing conflict when emotions are involved, when people have heated ideas or discussion, is not likely to result in a good outcome. If at all possible, suggest that people come back to a meeting, back to a conference call, back to the table after a break or at another date when people have had time to both gather additional information and also to regain calmness. I like to suggest that people have a few exit lines in your back pocket, things that will politely but firmly end a conversation. And it's okay to say such things as, I'm feeling a little anxious right now about where this conversation is going. Can we stop it here and regroup after a 5-minute break? When you do address conflict, and you do need to address it, as Carrie said, you can't put it off. If conflict is evident in a collaborative, it will just simmer and simmer until it boils over. But when you do decide to address it, it's important to be specific and not generalize. Refer to a specific behavior that someone engaged in, a specific time, a specific date, and a specific setting. In other words, you want to stay away from addressing issues by saying things like, you always do this, you never do that. Whenever we get together, everyone always does this. Be specific about what you need. Why is the conflict causing you conflict? Negotiate what it is you need, but not what you want. You may want for everyone to complete items on their action plan and come to the meetings already having read their agenda and done their homework, but that may not be appropriate for everyone. Negotiate what you have to have. I need your report on my table by 4 p.m. tomorrow. Can you do that for me? Explore new options. If the person says, I can't get that report to you by 4 o'clock, what are some other things that will help? How can I help you? What do you need? Do you need more time? Do you need someone to do some additional research for you? Do you need someone to download the form for you? What do you need to make it work? Make sure that you're satisfying both the needs of the person who is feeling the conflict and is probably in power, as well as the person who's being given the feedback and is probably feeling they have little power. Conclude the discussion by testing for understanding, asking the person what they think you need and when that you need it by, and then summarizing the agreement. These are 6 tips that will help you when you're facing conflict to think about how can we remain calm, how can we get our needs met, and how can we test for understanding and summarize to make sure that what we thought was going to be occurring is actually going to occur. And I'm going to turn.
Okay, I'm going to switch interpreters now too while we're transitioning.
Okay, are we good with our interpreters? Awesome, thank you. Thanks, Jane. And we're about to wrap it up and have some time for questions. These are the resources and references that we used, which Heather or Sarah have shared in the chat box via links to these actual documents. You can view them, you can download them, and use them yourselves. And if you have questions about these documents, feel free to let us know. To summarize, we know that alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much, right? If we bring more brains to whatever it is we're looking at, then we'll get more perspectives and more expertise to help solve those problems. What questions do you have for Jane or myself? Feel free to drop those in the Q&A. And if you don't think about any questions right now, we will always be open to you emailing to reach out anything that you might have thought of later. So I see someone asked in the chat if the link for leading by convening is provided in that link, and it is. And like I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different tools and resources. They have different rubrics in leading by convening to really see where you are using the partnership way and all of the habits of interaction that the resource talks about. We didn't get into that a lot today, but it's really a great resource to use as you're working with others, whether within your department or partnerships that are within the community. I'm just checking to see if there's anything coming in. Don't think so. Well, that's okay. I guess, Jane, we did a great job. They have no questions. But again, if you do think of anything, feel free to let us know. You can always contact us by going straight to our website, which you'll see right in front of you. There's the Contact Us button at the top. You can use that, or you can email us at Skippy, which is SCPI @mailbox.sc.edu. And if you had a particular question for Dr. Everson, I'm fine with just forwarding that question along to her. And I would suggest, if you're not already subscribed to our newsletter, to make sure you go ahead and subscribe, and you'll see that button right at the top of the website as well. You get a monthly newsletter, and you'll get periodic alerts whenever there is some type of free or cheap training going on within our community, any resources, any big alerts that we have, and of course, the recordings for today's sessions as well. So momentarily, if you have no questions, you'll see the evaluation pop up. And then if you can take a few minutes just to provide answers or your feedback to the evaluation, please do. And if you have more additional feedback that can't be captured in this Likert type scale, feel free to email that to us.
Mary?
Yes.
I have a question. Can attendees receive a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes, good question. Thanks, Sarah. So what I'll do is I'll PDF the PowerPoint, and I'll include that either in the online resource folder or an email out to participants. I'll figure out which is the easiest, most efficient way to do so.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm just going to have a few words here at the end, if that's all right. You have the evaluation in front of you. If you signed up to receive training credit or CEUs, please complete the evaluation. Also, I noticed that there were a couple of attendees who phoned in only. You'll need to email skippy@mailbox.sc.edu, and Sarah will put that in the chat. You'll need to email your name, the phone number that you used to call into the meeting, and the session that you were at, if you want credit, if you're looking for credit for the session. And I want to thank very much both of our presenters, Carrie and Jane, and also very much want to thank our sign interpreters, Beth and Brian from South Carolina School for the Deaf and Blind. We're going to leave the poll open for a few more minutes as we have about 70% of it completed. Remember, if you want credit, you need to complete the poll. Should be on your screen now.
And also, even if you don't want childcare training credit or CEUs, we do appreciate your feedback so that we can incorporate that into the other presentations we do in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that, Carrie. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded. And so we will make sure that we have the way to access our YouTube channel where the recording will be housed for the future.
And if you're not sure where the evaluation questions are, where to access the poll questions, you should see a little floating screen maybe on the top or the bottom. Your view is a little bit different than mine, but you might see it looks kind of like a bar graph and it says polling. So if it's not popping up right away, it might be down there. Or there might be 3 little dots and it says more. Again, I'm not sure because I know your view is slightly different as attendees as opposed to the presenter view. We're at 88%. That's just a couple people. I'd like to thank our hosts and co-hosts, Heather and Sarah, and I'd like to thank Jane as well, and also our interpreters, Brian and Beth Ann. We look forward to hopefully seeing some more of you tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday for additional sessions throughout our summer camp for the early childhood sessions. And if you or anyone you know are interested in middle or high school level sessions that might deal with transition services, you can check out what our friends at TASC or the Transition Alliance of South Carolina are doing, because they're also hosting sessions during this summer camp. Registration was separate than ours, but I know that they are also streaming live on YouTube and their website, and I am sure their sessions are going to be excellent as well. We're at 100%. Thank you for sharing your feedback with us, everyone. You sure you have no more questions? We got 7 more minutes. I see Donna had a question in the chat. If you missed the session, you can watch it, but we can only give credits to folks that attend the live session on Zoom webinar because it is a little bit more interactive and we have to follow certain regulations in order to provide different types of credits for folks. Well, if that's all, we can end the session and everyone can have a great afternoon and we will see you later this week.
Thank you, Carrie and Heather.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.